digging. So today, Lisa, I'm very happy to be introducing you and happy to hear your presentation in a few minutes. But first, a few words on you and your presentation. So Lisa Peacock completed her PhD in dramatherapy at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge in 2023. Peacock has practiced as a dramatherapist for more than a decade after being trained in the US and began practicing in the UK in 2019. She has worked with young and older adults facing mental health challenges, both in hospital and community settings. Peacock has extensive experience working with individuals experiencing post-traumatic stress, life-threatening illness, burnout, or compassion fatigue. Peacock works for the NHS in Devon, England, and has a small private practice. She will complete her training as a clinical supervisor in June. So we're looking to congratulate you in a couple of months with that. So today, Lisa Peacock's presentation is called Co-Production, Key to Group Dramatherapy with Veterans. Story medicine helps navigate uncharted waters. I'm sure I'm very much looking forward to this presentation. And Lisa, I want to give you all the floor to you, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Leonardo, you've been terrific setting this all up. And between the two of us, we should be able to get through the PowerPoint slides. We have co-created a way to get through this, and this is emblematic of the work. So the title of this talk is Co-Production is Key to Brief Group Dramatherapy. My PhD research question was, what is the impact of brief group dramatherapy on the well-being, sense of belonging, and transition of UK and US veterans? So first, we need to start out with a few definitions. So initially, we need to define what a veteran is. And the research uses two populations, UK veterans and US veterans. So in the UK, an individual is considered a veteran who serves a single day in His Majesty's forces, whether a member of the reserves or the regular enlisted personnel. In the US, however, a person is defined as a veteran as someone who serves in the active military, naval, or air force, and who is not discharged or released under conditions other than dishonorable. What that means is that if you are injured during boot camp or before your active duty assignment, you cannot claim the title veteran, and that has consequences in the US in terms of health care and other benefits. So the difference in the definition is significant. We're going to go to the next slide where we're going to define what well-being is. Well-being is defined as a balance within oneself and between self and others. It's an internal process, and it's also between people. The literature differentiates between subjective and psychological well-being, but for the purposes of this research, well-being was defined as a balance within oneself and between oneself and others. Sense of belonging is defined as the experiences of personal involvement in a system or environment so that a person feels themselves to be an integral part of that system or environment. It was identified as a basic human need by Anand initially in 1966 and further developed by Maslow in 54 and 68. Next slide. Transition is defined as exiting the military and entering civilian life. And we'll come back to the significance of this definition based on the population that participated in this study. Dramatherapy, the definition used here, or shared here is from the BATA website, the British Association of Dramatherapists website. It's an art-based form of psychotherapy. Dramatherapists are clinicians and artists that use a variety of mediums, including drama, story making, music, movement, and art, with any issue that presents itself in a session. And the sessions that were used in this research of brief group drama therapy included music, movement, art, drawing, storytelling, role playing. Next slide. This was mixed methods approach to the research. Different qualitative data were examined as part of this research. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the different types of data and then show a figure that hopefully helps clarify things. But this was a mixed methods approach that included data from the drama therapy sessions themselves, also interviews with participants, focus groups, and also case studies. The sessions, interviews, and focus group content were transcribed, and the process of dialogical narrative analysis was the narrative inquiry used to analyze this qualitative data. Dialogical narrative analysis uses whole stories, so it varies. It's different from thematic analysis that tends to break conversations up into identifiable themes. Dialogical narrative analysis, or DNA, uses whole stories with indwelling, spending a lot of time with the data, continuously writing throughout the data collection process, further reflections, and also takes into account the potential impact of audience and the context on the impact of the data that is collected. DNA was the qualitative analysis approach chosen because of this researcher not having an embodied awareness of what it means to serve in the military. And therefore, it was very important, I felt, to preserve the voices and the experiences of the participants themselves. That is, speaking with and to, rather than not speaking for. And this is similar to the idea that Jonathan Shea introduced in the early 2000s, who spoke about the importance of healing is not being done to survivors, but by survivors. So even the choice of the qualitative analysis approach speaks to the importance of co-production. Next slide, please. This mixed methods approach also looked at quantitative instruments measures. These were validated instruments from previous studies. First was the post-traumatic stress checklist, which has been used in the US and the UK. And it is a single-page instrument that helps participants use a Likert scale to indicate how often or if they experience certain post-traumatic stress symptoms. This was a measure of well-being. Another measure of well-being that was used was the changes in outlook questionnaire, and I used the short form of that. So it was a 10-question instrument that was a post-traumatic growth instrument and focuses on resilience and qualities of resilience. That was created by a UK researcher, Joseph. The sense of belonging instrument was used in the US, it was created in the US. It had never previously been used with veterans. And I can speak to that also later on in terms of limitations of that instrument. And the measures of community integration for service members was the instrument used for transition. That was a instrument that was created based on research with Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. And next slide. So in this mixed methods approach, there were different measurement intervals. First of all, before the group began, there was quantitative data that was collected and a short qualitative questionnaire that was provided to participants. The interviews themselves were conducted just after the group concluded, 3 months after the group concluded, and then 1 year after the group concluded. And these intervals were chosen to replicate previous drama therapy research with veterans. Also, the focus groups, I only analyzed that using qualitative data. So the data collection and data sources timeline, I did my best to try and make this clear in this presentation. The second dark green box indicates where the intervention occurred. That is the brief group drama therapy 8 weekly sessions. That was the intervention that was used. So it was 8 weekly sessions, 90-minute sessions, and prior to that, some measurements were taken. After the group, the interview, and the additional measurement instruments, quantitative measurement instruments were used at 3 months, then the 9-month focus group, and 12 months. Next slide, please. Participants were recruited in a variety of ways. Some of them found out about the group through advertising in a community newspaper and a brief interview with myself, flyers being posted around a town, word of mouth, other veterans suggesting that they had heard about a presentation or that they had seen a flyer. I also did presentations at veterans' residences and spoke to veterans groups to encourage participants. And also information was shared by some support workers. Next slide. So this overall shows the number of groups that were held, the number of participants, and the number who completed the study. So overall, there were 4 brief group drama therapy interventions. Each of them had the same structure. The first 2 were held in the US, and these were followed by 2 held in Scotland. Just for the purposes of research, I'm including the locations here. And I'm going to ask for the next slide because if this is going to be shared in a public forum, I would prefer that not be shown. What is significant is that 2 of the groups were held in residential settings and 2 were held in community settings. One of the residential settings was in the US, and then there was a community setting in the US. One of the residential settings was held in the UK, and then a community group was also held in the UK. There were different levels of participation in the 4 groups. The residential groups tended to have older veterans. Some of them had challenges with their physical health, and that's why they were living in the residential setting. You might have also noticed from that previous slide that there were more US than UK participants. So while one of my objectives in this research was to be able to draw some comparisons between US and UK veterans, those were limited by the number of participants who completed the study. In the US, there were a total of 10 who completed the study, and in the UK, there were a total of 3 who completed the study. However, the final person who completed the study, he was in a group for 2 sessions, and then that group disbanded because one participant decided to end his participation in the study. And under a duty of care, I continued to work with the single participant. However, working with the single participant was not the um, related to the research question that I had chosen as group drama therapy. So the data from the sessions 3 through 8 were not used for that. Next slide, please. So the guidelines of the sessions themselves, the 8 group drama therapy sessions, they were non-trauma focused, and this came from the literature because previous research had shown that veterans were most receptive to those interventions that did not have a trauma focus. Again, this speaks to the value of co-creation or co-production, so that the participants had the opportunity to choose the stories that they shared. And toward the end of the presentation, I'll revisit the subtitle of the talk about story medicine and explain that a bit more. Also, participants who had clinical and also subclinical PTSD symptom levels were included in the groups. And this was also informed by the literature, especially when the goal of the intervention was reintegration. Also, previous research by Dr. Linda Wynn suggested that participants had requested group work, and there was value placed on veteran-led exercises. Next slide, please. The other session guidelines that informed the structure of the brief group drama therapy is that I was very aware of my non-veteran and civilian status. Therefore, my goal in each of the sessions was to have the participants own the sessions and to make choices what to engage in, what not to engage in, whether to stay with a particular exercise longer than a single session, and so forth. I used the Renee Imuna 5-phase model of drama therapy. So each of the sessions had an opening ritual, a warm-up, an enactment or a main activity, a discussion, and then a closing ritual. We only worked with the stories that were shared. This was also suggested in the literature for brief group trauma therapy, that is not to probe for stories. That came from Gersey and the work of Landy also. And finally, the research of Cassidy was very helpful in terms of identifying some of the elements that previous participants in drama therapy valued. And some of these included working alongside with choice and control, and working with capacities or a resilience-based approach. So the findings. Next slide, please. In terms of the dialogical narrative analysis, these are some of the themes that were identified. There was an enhanced sense of belonging in the groups. Some of the phrases that people used included, I enjoyed being part of a unit, and I enjoyed experiencing a feeling of belonging and cohesion while participating in the group. Upon reflection in an interview, one participant said, described really being out there and didn't feel like he was connected. And he was part of a unit during his service. And then all of a sudden he realized when he left on his own, and then he was alone. And in his working environment, only his boss, in this instance, who was a veteran, understood his need to work on his own and in isolation from others while he reconnected to life on a daily basis among civilians and what that included and what that did not include. Participating in the group, he said, reestablished that he wasn't alone. There were a lot of stories about how veterans are different to civilians and spoke about differences in terms of how they worked, being able to work until the job is done, for example, or not being able to share their experiences with family members and so forth. Also, there were stories regarding being a civilian researcher and a clinician. And these stories were about teaching moments that brought cohesion to the experience in the groups. For example, this is a brief conversation that exemplified what I meant by a teaching moment. One participant said, because I mean, when a guy with a rifle is trying to help you, you don't care what religion. The other participant says, you know that man's watching your back and you're watching his. The first man says, it doesn't matter. The second man says, not in the armed forces. So they were trying to explain that religion was not significant during their military service. However, as veterans, it was significant. And other themes around stories connected to these teaching moments would be about wanting to participate in this study to potentially help other veterans and feeling like they could make a difference. Next slide, please. Another narrative analysis theme that arose had to do with embodiment, mental health, and well-being. And that is, for example, stories about what it took to first reach out for help and how there was a reluctance to say that you needed help. Some stories were shared around that. And also stories about emotional numbing. And for example, this was something that was shared in one of the sessions. And that's part of the problem, because you put up these walls and you put up these walls and you put up these walls until after a while, you can't get out. So when you have the opportunity, meaning to participate and to be part of a group, it jumps up at you. The sanctuary of the family was another theme that arose out of the dialogical narrative analysis. These would be stories from childhood. Some of them had to do with abuse. Some of them had to do with childhood experiences, motivations for joining the service, stories about being drafted or volunteering for service. Other stories regarding the sanctuary of the family had to do with helping their children who might have been in their teens or helping them into adulthood. And for many, they spoke about their families as if it was their new unit. Military moral identity. The majority of participants who, the majority of people who are in the forces are trained at the same time that they are, at the same time as their emergent adult identity is forming. And therefore, the core values of the forces remain significant into veteranhood. And I'll return to that theme again regarding transition being a life course process. And finally, homecoming stories. There were a number of stories that were shared regarding initial rejection, especially among those who served in the Vietnam War, and a lack of support during their exit from service. Some participants spoke about missing the brotherhood. This was only among those who volunteered for service. None of those who had been drafted spoke about missing the brotherhood. Some of them shared stories about fostering their own homecoming. For example, one participant spoke about his experience going back to Vietnam 30 years after, more than 30 years after he concluded service. And this was to find a young boy that he had helped save by taking to an orphanage and to helping to support his care. And while he went back to Vietnam under the pretext to find this young boy, then man, to see where he was, there was something that he gained for himself while he was there. And this was described by his spouse, who spoke of it looked like he had set down a burden, that she physically saw a change in him while they were in Vietnam, and then that carried on into their time returning home. Finally, another area of homecoming stories had to do with transitional stress symptoms, and this was evidenced by stories about multiple marriages, difficulty with relationships, difficulty holding a job, working among civilians, difficulty working under a civilian supervisor. This was also a thread of the stories. Next slide, please. So the story medicine that I will again return to, the pattern of sharing stories seemed to occur in this way, that there was a sense of belonging that created the foundation of support in the context of the group, and then stories were shared. Those stories led to meaning making, comparison, self-reflection, recreating a sense of belonging. That led to well-being, which added to more story sharing, which fed back into this loop during the context of the groups. So I've shared with you some of the narrative findings. In terms of the quantitative analysis, I'm going to briefly share some of these. Looking at the PTSD symptoms of participants, PTSD symptoms reduced for many of the participants in the groups at each of the subsequent measurement points. So that would be up to 1 year after the group, which is significant. PTSD symptoms reduced greater for those who began the study with subclinical PTSD symptom levels than those who had clinical PTSD symptom levels, but some of them still continued to experience reduced PTSD symptoms after the group, and as long as the last measurement interval of 1 year post group was taken. In retrospect, it might have been helpful to have another point of measurement, perhaps 2 or 5 years after completing the group, to find out what remained from that experience. Those who lived in the veterans' residential environments, rather than veterans who lived in the civilian context, had lower PTSD symptom levels before they participated in the group and after they participated in the group. So this said something about this being a characteristic of this subpopulation, and also speaks to some of the literature indicating that PTSD symptoms might actually be the result of or be enhanced by trying to live among civilians post-military service. So there's a piece of research for someone else to do. One of the other measures of well-being was the changes in outlook questionnaire. And there was an increased negative outlook for those with clinical PTSD symptom levels, and an increased positive outlook for those with subclinical PTSD symptom levels. One of the final things I want to say about the PTSD symptom reduction is that this was a reduction in symptoms regardless of the type of stories that were shared. It could be that some of the stories that were shared had to do with childhood or life as a veteran, and yet they contributed to a reduction in the PTSD symptoms. So that is also a further indication of the value of co-production approach to drama therapy, so that the participants are choosing what stories to share and when. Next slide, please. In terms of sense of belonging, some of the findings from the quantitative instruments include that for some, the sense of belonging increased during participation in the group, but was not sustained after the group. And that says something to the effect of how belongingness was enhanced while being among veterans, but if you lived your life within the civilian community and did not have a lot of regular interaction with veterans, that your sense of belonging then reduced. There was a greater sense of belonging, again, among those who lived in the residential context because they lived among veterans, than among those who lived in the civilian community context. And that was before the study as well as afterwards. It's noteworthy, too, that some of the focus group suggestions were for veterans to be offered an ongoing group instead of 8 sessions. Some of them suggested that they would like to participate as long as they wanted to. And so they would choose when to start participating and for how long to participate. And again, that is speaks to the person-centered approach, or the value of co-production. Next slide. Transition. There were low scores overall, with little change indicated by this outcome measure that was used in the study. Part of the reason for that was that it was a problematic measure that measured transition. Remember, transition was defined as leaving military service. Well, the majority of the participants had left the service 3 or more decades before participation in the study. Also, the narrative findings, as I suggested previously, is that transition is an ongoing or a life course process from the veterans in the forces. And part of that had to do with the types of stories that were shared. Again, the continuing salience of stories about the difference between veterans and civilians, speaking about their separation from service and what that entailed. And the exercises in the brief group drama therapy sessions did not have a specific military context. They dealt with different themes. Perhaps I should have spoken more about this. They dealt with different themes regarding identity, belonging, reaching out for help, exploring feeling, movement-based work with materials, and sometimes with the body. Let's see. The last thing I want to say about transition is that I think that transition is not the best word to describe what happens among veterans in the UK. In the US, the term that is commonly used is reintegration, and it's also not assimilation. Again, I believe because of the emergent adult identity that is forming at the same time that training and the values of the forces are inculcated to those in training. I believe that those continue to be adhered to throughout life. And that is also why the suggestion of transition or navigation, which I think is a better descriptive term, occurs over the life course. Previous research had shown some findings to suggest that navigation is a life course process among World War II and Korean War veterans. And this study found some evidence to suggest that it is the same among Vietnam War veterans and those who participated in subsequent wars in both the UK and the US. Next slide. So now we return to the subtitle of this talk, Story Medicine Helps Navigate Uncharted Waters. So story medicine is a story that is shared by choice in a therapeutic context. So it is the story that someone shares because they decide that this is what they want to share. And in some sense, it is helping them either affirm their sense of self, provide a way to compare oneself to others, provide a lesson to some. And story medicine itself, that term, which is one that I created, inspired by this research, comes from teachings that I have previously had from those in First Nations people, including a Seneca healer, Cheyenne Eagleheart, who on retreats with veterans would speak of medicine stories or modern day healing myths that are shared in community, and then people reflect back on the significance of that to themselves. What they are sharing back is their story medicine. That is what happened in the groups. People were sharing their story medicine. And again, the non-trauma focused, the co-creative approach, and the value of that. Next slide, please. Some other findings suggest reconsideration of group therapy for veterans. I have provided both qualitative and quantitative findings to suggest that group work could be helpful for veterans, especially if they are navigating their lives as veterans. And again, that was among veterans, perhaps the most with subclinical levels, that is peer group support. Current NICE guidance in the UK and the United States Veterans Administration therapy protocols no longer support group therapy. In fact, they support individual therapy that is often automated, offered remotely, and sometimes without one-to-one interaction. And recalling the foundation of the sense of belonging that helped create the sharing of the stories being so significant, and how that would be lacking in any intervention that did not provide group work. Also, it's significant that older veterans were more receptive to participate in brief group drama therapy. Younger veterans tended to be those who did not complete the study and tended to drop out. So there is something in that time since leaving service affected individuals' receptiveness to the group drama therapy approach. Next slide. As I mentioned, the peer group support, the value of the sense of purpose. Moral injury is one of those types of stories, and the moral injury is defined as actions that violate one's values. Those stories were only shared in the group context if more than one participant experienced a moral injury. Otherwise, the moral injury story was shared during the interview context. And next slide. The variation in the study population at the very bottom of this, because there were a variety of participants who participated in a variety of conflicts, had varied ages, varied education levels, and some isolated cases, such as one woman participated, one Black participated, one Jewish person participated, and one mixed race participant engaged in the study. Just like the moral injury, participants who experienced a moral injury, if they were isolated cases, these types of stories were not shared in the group context. So that is a limitation of the study. There were no pre-group instruments, but there was a pre-group questionnaire. That should say questionnaire, not an interview. There was no pilot study. Pilot study would have helped, for example, identify that it might be helpful to have veteran participants to pick and choose the activities that they engaged in. I used my experience working with veterans in the US among a population of veterans recovering from homelessness. And those exercises that that veterans seem to be the most receptive to. And that might not have been a good assumption to make in choosing the activities and enactments that were used in these sessions, these group drama therapy sessions. There were also an unequal number of US and UK participants, far fewer UK participants, so the comparison of findings is quite limited. Lessons learned for drama therapy practice. I'm mindful that I'm at 45 minutes now. Again, co-production is key. I think there's a challenge to using the word therapy, even in the word drama therapy. It would be great if we could call this a drama-informed working group, for example, for veterans to be receptive to participating in it. Also, potentially participating with a veteran co-facilitator might be another innovation that could be used in future research. And again, I've already spoken about moral injury being different, perhaps doing a separate group only with those who experienced a moral injury. I do think that a replication of the study is needed, perhaps in Australia or Canada, to find out if some of the tendencies in the findings were unique to the US culture and to a lesser degree to the UK culture, or whether it was more general among a veteran navigation of life after military service experience. Next slide. And again, co-production begins with the co-creation. I've already spoken to that. And there is another piece of research that could be done with Vietnam veterans, with Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, could be helpful because of the similar guerrilla tactics of the enemy, fighting in urban contexts, and the likelihood of moral injury. And then if you flip through these next slides, Leonardo, these are the references. I'll be happy to share the presentation with others. And if you keep going, then you will find myself, where I am thanking you for your kind attention. And now I welcome your questions. And the final slide. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Well done. A round of applause from the.
Thank you.
I think you can have people react. They should be able to react to the claps. Yes, I see there's some claps going on.
Yeah, I can't remember how to get to the other screen for the questions.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Yes, I can.
So,
thank you. I can't see the applause, but thank you for telling me.
Yes, there's been few applause, and well, to start off, I have a few questions because I don't see any questions so far. But so what I understood is that your drama therapy is a participant-driven work. You really emphasize the co-creation aspect.
Yeah.
Yet you have a structure to each session. Each session. That's very important. So first of all, what's the kind of structure that you kind of mentioned it quickly?
Yes, I use the 5-phase model of Renee Amuna, which means that there is an opening ritual that would include, for example, reflections from the previous session. It might be if we sat in a circle and the group decided to do a breathing exercise, for example, a collective breathing exercise. We might begin that way. We also, the second phase would be a warm-up exercise where we would start to connect to our creative sensibilities, access the imagination, and then we would transition to the enactment, which would be the main activity of the session. And that might be role playing, that might be using a piece of poetry and writing their own poetry. It might be collective storytelling or a drawing exercise. There would always be a discussion following that exercise, and people could share on that exercise what it brought up for them. They might want to talk about something that was happening outside the window, for example, or sounds that they heard. In other words, it was a facilitated discussion, but it was very much holding the space and not leading. And finally, there was the closing rituals, where sometimes people would speak about their intentions for the coming week, or what they had hoped to receive and what they had gained from the experience, and that sort of thing, or commitments that they were making to one another during the week or for the next session. So,
See,
yes.
that's very
Okay.
interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Uh-huh.
Yes, there are some questions now coming up. I have a few more questions as well, but it'd be great to give that some to the um, audience. So Francis
Mm-hmm.
is asking, "Hi Lisa, thank you
Mm-hmm.
for your talk. Um, what leads, what led you to describe what happened in this group as co-production, rather than any other way of talking about participation or being client-led?"
Co-production is from the literature, and there is also in the literature the term co-creation. Um, I thought of it more as co-production because I did not have a pilot study and engage veteran feedback before the group began on the exercises to choose for the different sessions. However, it was a co-production because the sessions were often led, and elements of the sessions were led by different participants. For example, one participant might lead a yoga warm-up exercise, for example. And another example of co-production was when participants chose to continue a role-playing exercise from one session into the next because they were enjoying exploring the experiences, role-playing, and the dynamics that were addressed in the play or the film, which was about reaching out for help.
Great, interesting. Yeah, this co-creation is very important. And I had a question related to this.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you're able to answer, but what were the most interesting stories chosen?
Oh, well, it's hard to say what were the most interesting, because interesting has to do with lots of different things. In terms of, I can tell you an interesting story regarding well-being, where a story was shared, yet the participant was not sure why that particular story continued to be so salient for them more than 30 years later.
Hmm.
that was not resolved in the group, and that was not something that I resolved for the participant, but helped hold the environment where he could share that story. And some participants spoke about not hearing, had known one another before the group, but yet not knowing stories ahead of time that they had not shared in that kind of deep, meaningful way. And again, you can tell I'm being very general here. Some of the other interesting stories had to do with the ways that participants were seeking a new sense of purpose or finding a new way forward as veterans. Ways to be of service, such as being part of an honor guard, for example, during military funerals, or one participant not being as comfortable with words and describing feelings or being able to get in touch with his feelings, yet he continued to find outlets for his artistic expression and continued to do other art forms and continues to do other art forms to this day, several years after the study,
Right.
that
Inspiring
help
type of thing.
him connect to his artistic identity.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So Linda is
Mhm.
asking,
Yeah.
interesting. Thanks for sharing, Lisa. I really like your slide with the model, story sharing, sense of belonging, story sharing, etc.
Mhm.
Are you using this model with other cohorts?
Currently, I am not doing group work. I do individual therapy work as a drama therapist with the NHS. I would like to do that. In fact, I have been reaching out more recently to start another veterans group where I am in Devon, and hope to help that come to fruition. There are other groups that I feel personally connected to that I would also like to share this format with, because I think it's very important to have this sense of ownership, this cohesion that helps with the story sharing. And again, providing the space and the freedom so that people can share what they would like and not share what they would not like. I think that's very important.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the increase in cohesion.
Mhm.
Oh, well, before we move,
Mhm.
I had a question about cohesion, but Francis has
Yeah.
a question on the cycle model again.
Mhm.
So Francis asks, did you find there were any differences between how the stories were presented at two different stages in the cycle? Could a story be doing both at once?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes and yes. That's the short answer, Francis. Um, um, for UK veterans, for example, some of the stories regarding grief experienced and also um, challenges to mental well-being were able to be shared sooner in the groups than in the US groups. Um, and I have a couple of ideas why that might be, but I don't have the study was too limited to be able to say anything conclusively. And again, I was challenged by the smaller size of the UK participants in this study. However, one thing that I have not talked about has to do with um, I became fascinated with the work that could be done in a dyad, where with a therapist, if there were, or with somebody facilitating, um, when there were two participants in the group, there was an intense kind of sharing that occurred to the degree that I became a fly on the wall and just witnessed what evolved. I didn't need to engage in any way other than just helping to hold the space. And so, but I only have a couple of instances of that, and those instances are only in the UK, not in the US. So I can't say anything conclusive about that. I hope that answers your question, Francis. I You just reminded me of something that I did not share in the presentation. So,
Yeah, Francis is from Cardiff, and he's a
ah,
music therapist, and
ah,
he's doing a PhD in researching co-productions of arts therapies provision.
oh, wonderful. Yeah, happy to share my contact information with you, Francis.
And the previous question was by Linda, and
Hmm.
Linda is a
Hmm.
PhD in dramatherapy with veterans,
Hmm.
PTSD, from
Yes,
RU as well. Yeah,
yes. Her work was very instructive, and my talks with Linda were very helpful throughout my experience at Anglia Ruskin. Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Um, I have a question about, we'll have maybe one or two more questions before closing.
Okay.
But I had a question regarding just clarification about teaching moments. You said
Hmm.
teaching moments increased cohesion. Why did that
Hmm.
happen?
Because I think that was related to a sense of purpose. I think if one participant could share something about veteran culture that I might not know, then the other would join in, for
Hmm.
example. Or, for example, before the group started, as I was spending time with veterans in the residences and getting to know people, one person who ended up participating gifted me a Glaswegian dictionary because he wanted to make sure that I could understand some of the phrasings and vocabulary that was used
Nice.
by participants. So when one person was offering um, some information, some knowledge to share, then another would share, and then it would just build like that.
Hmm.
So
Fascinating.
yeah, it was kind of a sense of purpose, and I think also the being able to provide information that would be helpful to future veterans or future participants was also part of that sense of purpose.
Right. Because they were able to record all this information and you'd be able to, through your work, share it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right.
Yes.
Fascinating. Um, I have one question about the questionnaires and qualitative
Hmm.
matrix.
Yep.
Which did you find the most insightful?
I would say the open-ended questionnaires were the most insightful because those ended up having leading to the or being part of the interviews with participants, and those would range in time from 45 minutes to 2 hours. And in fact, I would just uh, be present for as long as someone wanted to share and speak about their experiences. Um,
Nice.
and Sometimes it was related to the questions I was asking, and sometimes it wasn't related to the questions that I was asking. But it also helped inform what the experience of that person was. And so I welcomed that.
Oh, great. Uh, which ones could you remind us which were the open-ended ones as questionnaires?
The open-ended questionnaires were the context of the interviews that were done. Um, Actually, there was an open-ended questionnaire at the beginning of the group, but people filled that out on their own. But then
Mhm.
subsequent to the group, then that was the interview context. And
Okay,
the first and second follow-up interviews were done in person. The 1 year follow-up was not done in person um, for the most
right.
part. In some cases, it could be done in person.
Great. And just the last question on that, the questionnaire, did you have a framework that you developed, or was it part of a established set of questions for that interview?
Part of it was from the literature, and some of it was from questions that I was interested in collecting data about. Some of it was just collecting demographic data, for example, and that might lead to particular stories. So,
Right, great. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It was a pleasure to have you present today.
Thank you.
I just want to remind the audience that they can follow our next lectures here. Next month will be Ri Asano talking about the social affective neuroscience of musical rhythm. So make sure to check that out. But Lisa, I'd like to read out some of the messages of the audiences.
Oh,
So the
great.
audience said, "Hello, I'm Sally. Sally was is a final year of the new Master Dramatherapy course in Edinburgh. So she's
Great.
currently on placement in a palliative care setting.
Yes.
Co-production is a way of working. I feel she feels it's very important. Co-production.
Yeah.
That she connects to that. And
Good.
Ditty Doctor,
Yes.
dramatherapist and researcher, also connected at RU.
Yes.
So thank you so much for introducing yourselves in the audience. And yes, please, another round of applause to Lisa. Thank you so much for everything.
Ooh, thank you all for being present. Even though I can't see you, I have no concept of how many people are here or who is here. Thank you very much. And thank you, Leonardo, because we had technical issues. And so Leonardo was able to show the slides so that I could see my notes. And you did a great job. It was amazing. You set it up within that half hour.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon.
Thanks. Okay.
Okay.